Chair Porter and board members. Tonight we are going to bring you one of the two reports we bring you about every 6 months on the district's racial equity policy. This report is a part of that policy. Obviously, last board meeting we provided you with a equity plan, a racial equity plan on reopening. This is from the larger scale. Now, we don't have some of the data that we usually present to you when it comes to our racial equity policy. For example, disciplinary outcomes, suspensions. We do not have those to report to you because of being in the pandemic. But I think Dr. Marshall and his team have done a great job of putting together a plan with this presentation will be with multiple stakeholders, including principals, I believe community members and other chiefs, but Dr. Marshall is going to be the quarterback. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Marshall.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Board Chair Porter, Board, and Dr. Polio. Again, this is the Racial Equity Policy Update. And because of COVID, which we understand there are some of the data that normally Dr. Dawson, myself, and others will be presenting on, that kind of sat in a stalemate position due to COVID-19. But I think as we go through this, I know as we go through this presentation, you will see that there has been some updates, there has been some progress, and we will discuss that as we go through. All right, Dr. Polio has said many times, as I have, there's probably only 13 districts in the nation that have a racial equity policy. I guarantee you we're the only district that's ever quoted Outkast, the rap group. But this is exactly what happened. We planned a pretty picnic with our policies, and then the weather changed and we had to close school. And when we closed school, there was a couple of things that we could have done. We could have just paused on racial equity. We could have paused on achievement. We could have paused on a bunch of things, but we didn't. But when March hit a year ago to this month, we had a decision to make, and we did not back off of that decision. So yes, you can plan a pretty picnic, but you can't predict the weather. So the racial equity policy remained a pillar, and we can go to the next one, I'm sorry. A lot of times as this was going on, community members and maybe even internal people would ask Dr. Polio, so what are we doing? How are we going to do this? And he always said, we're just going to double down and do the work. And as we double down and do the work, this list on the side here, you all, are things that have happened in spite of COVID, things that have happened in spite of having to work remotely. We've had a virtual equity institute, still the biggest virtual equity institute in this region. We convened teachers to build a Black Experience Teacher Institute that we presented to you all, and they have designed lessons that will drive curriculum for the years to come. We did implicit bias training for the district. We opened up a brand new school targeting girls, African-American girls, and leadership. We hired anti-racist pedagogy curriculum specialists, all during the pandemic. Under the leadership of Dr. McPhail, we've done REAP committee team meetings. All middle and high schools have a BSU. Virtual lit and numeracy programs after school and on weekends were happening and are happening right now. And then we started the Louisville teacher residency in the pandemic, focusing on what the leader of the district said, we double down and do the work. Just a reminder, we had central office commitments, and here's some other things that we did. We have an equity monitoring progress tool. My team, along with some of Dr. Coleman's team, we monitor the progress of the schools. We talk about their school plans and we see if they're actually doing it. We have improved the good faith effort process under leadership of Chris Perkins and Ms. Harden. ECE added central office commitments. Chief Chevalier will be speaking to that. We've done the REAP reviews of all the REAPs that we have done in central office, and we're working on an equity screener to actually make sure we're putting, under our leadership cohort, we are putting principals in our district that are screened for equity. We are saying in JCPS, which a lot of districts aren't, in the station you're in, if you're not doing racial equity work, it's going to be very hard for you to move forward if you can't show and have a cachet of work that you've done in your current station that you're about racial equity. How should you be moving forward if you haven't done it in your current position? So we're creating a screener for equity. Dr. Adams, Dr. Webb, and others are working on with diversity, equity, and poverty to move this work. And then the racial equity growth goal for all cabinet members and central office leaders. Something else that I think is cutting edge, ambitious, aggressive, and really tackles anti-racism as a system. All right, so curriculum. When you control a man's thinking, you do not have to worry about his actions. Carter G. Woodson. So we understand in JCPS that there's a curriculum issue. Dr. Polio talks a lot about, and the board talks a lot about student engagement. Dr. Coleman is very serious about that, and and we know that there are some curriculum issues that we have that will mitigate behavior, that will improve belonging, that will improve outcomes for students. I'm gonna go through this and then toss it off to Dr. Coleman. But curriculum and pedagogy, while in the pandemic again, under leadership of Dr. New and Dr. Coleman, we have a Black historical consciousness framework that Dr. New is working on with our teachers to make sure that the consciousness of Black history is done throughout all subjects. And then high school has African American electives, and then a simple document, which is really a cadre, a cache of lessons that teachers can use that have been filtered to affirm race and racial equity that our teachers will get in August. That's being designed. And then the infamous affirming racial equity tool is a tool that we use to make sure our curriculum is affirming racial equity. And then the equity conclaves, I'll just be honest, this is one I'm very excited about. Um, let me be quiet. Dr. Coleman, you want to speak to the equity conclave and how we're kind of getting granular with the institutes?
I think you should speak to that one, Dr. Marshall. You are excited about it. I am too.
Okay, so the equity conclaves we are now getting very granular with our work in role groups. We've had big equity institutes, which we're still doing, but our role groups are now having their individualized equity institutes. So Dr. Coleman's team and the role groups that she leads will meet with my team and have equity institutes with national leaders and experts in the field to actually talk about how, as an AIC, your role in driving racial equity is important, and here's what needs to happen. And then teaching and learning, we're doing the same thing. We're doing it with counselors, Friskies, APs, principals. So we're moving that work forward. The TOTE, this is a new idea, and it's a team of teachers for equity. So we are disrupting literature, or we're disrupting history. We're not teaching this whitewashed, soft Martin Luther King. We're challenging the way in which we're teaching King to make sure people understand that he was just as radical as anyone else. And we're not talking about this King that was to try to make everyone feel good. We're challenging the history of the Kentucky Derby. We're challenging the way in which we're teaching it, because we understand, and we've had conversations with some board members, we understand that the hegemonic way in which we are teaching is a problem, and it is causing the widening of a gap. So we have identified teachers, no one sitting up in central office, teachers in the battlefield that are doing this work. And now, under the leadership of Dr. Polio, we are giving them extra service to actually build out what they're doing in classrooms to share with community. Social justice and art, Ms. Porter has sat in on a lot of those. Some of you other board members have as well. We are now tackling the arts because you all said that that is important. So we are now using teachers and schools to use their art programs to address social injustices that we have witnessed here in Louisville and abroad, all while in a pandemic. Carmen, I think I hogged that entire slide. Is there anything you want to add? I'm sorry.
No, I think it's great. We are really, really excited about this work. And something else that's come from the pandemic, which seems such a contrast, is that despite not being together in person, we have really come together in our work. Dr. Marshall and I we every day are working on something together. And it is, we just know that the work of racial equity is not just the work of one department. This is all of us. And, the tools and resources that he and his team have provided have been wonderful. And I'll share one quick anecdote to show just how this is really starting to move out into the district. The Affirming Racial Equity tool has led to teachers questioning some of our resources that have been attached to the curriculum frameworks, and we, it's causing them to look at resources in a different way. And so they've brought those things to our attention. We've, addressed those in whatever way was needed. And we've even brought things to the attention of vendors with programs that we use, when we notice things that are not the way that we know now they should be. And so I think when you really start to see teachers noticing new things and looking at things differently, I think that is a great sign for the work that's been done. So.
And if I could add in one thing to this slide on number 2, high school African American elective. I'm probably giving this away. We are working right now with the University of Louisville and the Pan-African Studies Department to create a dual credit high school African American elective that would have at least 3, possibly 6 hours of college credit for kids that take this class at the University of Louisville, and would be offered to every single high school in JCPS. So great opportunity where the curriculum's not designed by us, but actually designed by the University of Louisville.
All right, so I will hand this over to one of our members of the Advisory Council for Racial Equity, also known as ACRE, Ben Johnson, and he will kind of talk about the contributions of this council and this committee and the meetings that he has had and the meetings that this group has had with Dr. Polio and others. Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Dr. Marshall. So I've been a member of the Advisory Council for Racial Equity for the last couple of years, and what we have contributed is a broad-based group made up of many members of the community as well as some members of JCPS, and we just bring a different perspective to the work. We are trying to make sure that various perspectives are taken into consideration, including the fact that I'm a public school graduate myself, but out of Philadelphia. So I've been a part of a much larger district and know that they can be successful in educating a wide variety of young people. So what we're trying to do is make sure that that stays in front of JCPS. I have a son who graduated from Manual, so I'm aware of what goes on with JCPS from that side as a parent as well. I'm also working for the city as the Assistant Director for Recreation, partner with JCPS quite frequently on providing programs and opportunities for young people. So what we do in terms of this council is, again, make sure that JCPS is held accountable, work very closely with Dr. Marshall, the superintendent, Dr. Polio, has come to a couple of meetings, and we're looking to sort of press that, make sure that we stay in contact, make sure that this is not something that's put on the back burner, that we look at this from the very beginning. How will equity be affected by these decisions that are made? What might seem small to some can be huge to others. We want to make sure that that stays at the forefront, and in fact, are looking forward to, again, making sure that there's some push and pull. And I'm also happy to say that we don't always agree on everything. If you have one body that's a monolith, that really doesn't do anybody any good. So even amongst the council, we have some spirited back and forth on occasion, but always keep the importance of the young people first. And as far as what are some of our concerns and points of interest from the council, one of the things we've been speaking about quite frequently and consistently is wanting to figure out how we can engage with the board more. We want to hear from you all, but we also want to share directly with you some of our concerns, some of our ideas, some of the things that we would like to see happen, and also learn your perspective. So we again wanted to make sure we do that properly, working with the superintendent, working with Dr. Marshall, and even engage the legal counsel to make sure that we do it properly as required by the state, as required by all of the governing bodies. So for me personally, something that we spoke about quite a bit was wanting to engage directly with the board, and that's what we were talking about. Something else that's very important to us are the REAPs, to make sure that not only are they used appropriately, but they are used in a meaningful way, and that, again, we don't assume what kind of issues should run through the REAP. We don't say, well, we have to run X number and let's make sure we hit that number. That substantive programmatic changes, substantive ideas, whether it's curriculum, whether it's discipline, whether it's extracurricular activities, that the things that are truly going to affect the young people are the things that are run through that, which ultimately means everything. So I guess with that, I will stop speaking.
Thank you, Ben. All right, so Advisory Council for Racial Equity, also one of the attachments, and I think that was on I think that was one of the things we sent to you all as an attachment. They have a list of recommendations that Dr. Polio sat down. I don't think we started that meeting till 7, and we stayed till about 9:30. And he listened to every recommendation, reminded me that some of those recommendations need to go into the reopening plan, all of that. So it has been very proactive work, and I do believe the board, Chief Dennis has, or my secretary has put that up there. Next slide. All right, tech equity. Before I hand it over to Dr. Belcher, we all know who this is, Lyman Johnson. And one of the things and Ms. Porter knows I used to, Ms. Porter knows that I knew Lyman Johnson. One of the things he always said was, are you being taught or are you being told? Are you listening or are you learning? So when Kermit's going to talk about what tech equity means as relates to student agency and the transcending in the direction we're trying to go as relates to tech equity and racial equity.
Thank you, Dr. Marshall. So in regards to digital equity, there are 3 gaps that make up the digital divide. So those 3 gaps are basic technology needs for students, classroom use, and student agency. As far as the basic needs, access to student instructional devices, software, internet access, and infrastructure. In regards to the access to student instructional devices, JCPS has significantly increased our access with mobile devices for all students. Next year, we'll actually be close to 1-to-1 for every single school, every single child. Software, teaching and learning is collaborating with schools to evaluate and provide digital content. Internet access, we've deployed hotspots this year to students that needed internet access. We're continuing to expand our wireless, our Wi-Fi enabled devices at our middle schools for next year. Also, our infrastructure, we continue to upgrade our network infrastructure. We've been proactive in upgrading our wireless access to handle the additional mobile devices. And so once these basic technology needs are met, this provides enhanced instructional opportunities. So the classroom use, it gives opportunities for blended learning opportunities for students. And then finally, student agency, which gives students voice and choice in their learning, personalized and authentic learning experiences, such as the backpack of success skills. By continuing to address these 3 components in our future state, this will help ensure equity for all students by closing the digital divide. Thank you.
Before I hand it over to Chief Chevalier, the racial equity policy is older than the division that Chief Chevalier is leading. When she took on this job, it didn't take her 48 hours to reach out to myself and others to make sure that she was the one that initiated, to make sure that she was a part of the central office commitment to racial equity. So I want us to remember that the policy is older than the division, yet and still, in the pandemic and with other things, Chief Chevalier has set goals that she is about to share and some other things that her division is doing.
Dr. Marshall, you took the words out of my mouth. I was going to say, thanks to you, I was supported in our department, and we are committed both for the district-wide for support for racial equity and also for our students with disabilities. Our corrective action plan, our ECE corrective action plan, continues to show we are disproportionate in several areas of special education, so we are going to focus on that. Our racial equity goals reflect the CAP indicator data, and that's what you will see, the 3 bullets up there. Indicator 4 are suspension rates with students with disabilities. We need to reduce disproportionality and discipline practices for students with disabilities by providing our PD and that cultural responsive training and ECE referral process. We have put our referral process through the REAP and looking at that process and how we are referring kids to special education, especially into that EBD category. We're looking at indicator 5, our least restrictive environment. And what that is increasing equitable access to the regular education curriculum, getting kids into the classrooms with core content teacher. We're coaching our teachers and our implementation coach on how to read data analysis and decision-making processes when they are looking at an IEP to get kids in the regular education setting. And indicator 10 is our disproportionate representation of African American students in EBD. We're going on many years of that. We provide PD and appropriate interventions. We're getting down to the nitty-gritty of that, and that is designed to reduce disproportionality in identifying those students in that EBD category. So those 3 big things that we're working on currently.
Okay, in culture and climate, just some things to share as we move this work forward. You heard Mr. Johnson talk about the REAPs. There is over 400 REAPs that have been done. My team is actually doing a review of those REAPs and doing follow-up with the REAPs and seeing, okay, we filtered this. Okay, Dr. Marshall, you filtered this and said it needs to stop or it needs to pivot. Have you? If not, why did you do a REAP? And then SBDM training. I think it was you, Dr. Cope, that asked at the last meeting, is there a touch point for parents? And one of the things Dr. Shauna Stinton does in my division is work with SBDMs. We actually had an institute where our parents came that for almost, but I'd say about 80% of all the SBDMs, and we took them through the anchor document of the REAP. We talked to them about the racial equity policy, the importance of hiring, and what we're trying to do is we march towards justice and racial equity, and we're doing that in our SBDM trainings. And then an anti-racist training cohort. The specialists in my division are leading teachers, APs, some principals through what it means to be through what it means to be an anti-racist teacher, an anti-racist leader, and how we do that work. In a partnership with Spalding, we have some people that have retired and just can't let it go, and now they're working at Spalding, and they are piloting this equity screener. So everybody that's raising their hand saying they want to be the next superintendent of JCPS, they want to be the next principal. Well, this cachet of things, whatever station you're in, you need to be able to say that I'm doing this here, I'm doing this here. So come on, guys, give me a shot. I am being racial equity in this station. Therefore, I'm eligible I should be considered to move forward. And what does that do to those that aren't about racial equity? They don't get to lead any further than they are. And that's the kind of work and the kind of tenacity that we are doing with this district and the racial equity policy. All right, so I'm about to hand this over to Dr. Dossett, and yeah, this is the data part of the stuff that she could gather. And remember that COVID kind of made some of our data stale or not move the way we all want it to. So Dr. Dossett.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Marshall. So I'll just touch briefly on a few of the key metrics that we were able to track during this school year. As Dr. Marshall mentioned, there's a couple of different data points that we normally track through the racial equity plan that we weren't able to track in terms of test scores, and behavior data is a much smaller sample. So we did also present some information back in the September report around course enrollments and things like that. So when we look at participation during the fall semester for NTI, overall we see about a 90% participation rate, but you do see some differences across student groups. So our Asian students have the highest participation rate at 95.8, and our African Americans have the lowest participation at 87.4. There are some areas to celebrate in terms of our gifted and talented numbers. So what this chart shows you is out of all of the total number of gifted and talented students, what percentage is made up by each of the student groups. So out of all of our gifted and talented students, 20.4% are African American. That's a 1% increase from the prior year. And we also saw an increase in our Hispanic and our 2 and more races. So when we look at that by category, so we're tracking specifically here the number of African American students by the categories of gifted and talented. And specifically here we're looking at creative thinking, leadership skills, and visual and performing arts, the categories around general intellectual ability, and the specific academic areas weren't updated because testing didn't happen in the fall. But overall, what we see are for the 2021 school year, 917 students identified across these categories compared to 637 the prior year. So that's about a 44% increase. So we are seeing gains in this area in particular.
So what happens when you disrupt the way we normally identify students, particularly understanding that a system is designed to maybe marginalize students? You see some of those gains that we're working on in gifted and talented out of Dr. Coleman's shop with Dr. Dawson's help. Just continuous improvement. Some of the things that we understand must happen is if we're going to really be about racial equity, a lot of the things that were in 2021 need to stay, in 2020 need to stay there, and we don't need to come into 2021. And what are we going to do to be different? So the following slides are kind of about some of the things we're doing in future state work and with some community engagement. The first one is programmatic access, Justice Now, and learning hubs. As COVID ravaged the country, the world, everything, there were some things that we knew we needed to do to keep our students engaged and to address racial equity. So the Justice Now cohort, led by these phenomenal, both teachers of the year at different years, Matt Kaufman and Nairi Clayton Taylor, have created Justice Now, housed in my department, but works closely with everyone, where students get to talk about racial injustice, environmental equity, economic equity, and really put voice to what they're already learning and connect it to justice and challenge racist systems. And that is something, excuse me, that is something that we're going to continue to build out. Schools meet individually, interschool, intergenerational, and collaborations to actually have these conversations. There's a partnership with Kentucky Derby Foundation, and we're going to have a Justice Fest. All the students in, don't quote me, it's more than 10 schools that are doing this work. All the students are going to come together and share what they feel like is inequitable or unjust and give solutions on how to address it. This is also in partnership with our learning hubs. Another thing, a leadership you guys and Dr. Polio have said is that we need to continue to have learning hubs because we need to make sure students have access, regardless of where they live, to tutoring, to food, to technology. So our learning hubs and our community support have been a great addition to this work. And Dr. Polio has been very clear that will continue as well. So these are some things when we're talking about programmatic access in relation to just gifted and talented. Ms. Porter, you've been beating that gavel, that desk for a while. These are other things that we're saying are important as we move the work forward. Okay, I am going to share this one with you, Robert Moore. I'll let you go first because I'll get carried away.
I appreciate that. I was fully expecting you to. I had to write down some extra notes just in case on my sheet. But I appreciate you giving me this opportunity to share out, and thank you to our my fellow chiefs for delivering the information on our current state. But what I want to discuss with you is our future state and our future work towards racial equity. And I appreciate that reference to outcasts, and hopefully we can get back to better weather when we do. This is the kind of work you're going to see from us. First of all, number one, level set questions. We not only level set during our real meetings on every other Friday with some videos and some quotes from Dr. Marshall, but we also level set when it comes to our future state teams. So even though racial equity was not a future state team, it is embedded in every level and every stage of the future state work. So there are questions specifically assigned for each level and each stage in our future state work. And every team knows what the questions are. And then student assignment. We're going to return to that work, and you're going to see some recommendations from us very soon. I've been kept up to speed and get updated weekly from our student assignment team. And also revisit and revise our school plans. And I think we can all admit we've learned a lot this past 12 months about ourselves, about our community, and about society. And so we need to really look at our racial equity plans, revisit them, revise them, and school by school. And I think it would be disrespectful to our profession as educators if we don't go back and learn from the past year. And we expect that of our kids. We demand that of our kids, that they look at the plans that they're making, they look at the work they're making, and revise that. So if we expect and demand that of our students, I think we should expect and demand that of ourselves. And then number 4, board training, and Dr. Marshall will have an outline plan for that. Number 5, the district plans to address COVID-19 and our reopening with a faster pace and more direct goals. We have a progress monitoring spreadsheet that we're keeping track. We're going to update it frequently. We've already made progress with our district plans to address COVID-19, and I thank you guys for pushing us as a board. We needed that push, and we're working towards progress there. And disruptive innovation. I know Dr. Marshall mentioned the anchor documents, and they're designed to be disruptive, but it's one thing to be designed, and it's one thing to be implemented. We're at the stage where we need to see impact, and that's what we're working on, making sure that those anchor documents are impactful. And then required equity goals for administrators. All administrators have to have a required equity goal in their professional growth plan. So those are disruptive things that we're working towards the future. And then our state have adopted the PEACE standards. And there's a specific standard, standard number 3, that every principal is evaluated on racial equity now. And so that is a disruptive innovation that was born in our state, and we were well ahead of that. So I'm proud to say we were well ahead of that, and our leaders shouldn't have any problem with meeting that evaluative standard. And then lastly, coalition of retired black principals. Dr. Marshall talked about some of the principals that are working with aspiring leaders, and one of them is my mentor, Kurt Lattimore. If we can have a coalition of black principals helping out some of our up-and-coming leaders, I think it would be very, very impactful. So, Dr. Marshall, you want to add to that slide?
Sure. The Coalition of Retired Black Principals is already a group that has coalesced, if you will, has met with Board Chair Porter and some others, met with Dr. Polio, and want to mentor some of our new in the game principals, but also want to really support and fortify the racial equity work. They have been nothing but complimentary, but of course concerned on staying the course. They feel as if this is a pickup from where they left off, and I always say I stand on the shoulders of them, as we all do. So to sit in front of 20 black principals that have done it, tried and true, and then to tell the board chair that they want to do another tour of duty gratis, but to just help us move forward and really learn the racial equity policy is something that we have in place. And again, Dr. Polio has met with them a couple of times, and we have heard what they want to do, and we're responding accordingly. The next slide, as we talk about looking at equity and staffing, I have an executive administrator from the AIS ranks. I believe I have one of the best leaders in the district that is now my executive administrator, and he is going to talk about his role, some of the things that he is addressing with racial equity, and then another new position that is definitely needed and timely due to some of the things that have happened in the country as of recent.
All right, thank you, Dr. Marshall, and thank you, Chair Porter, board members, and Dr. Polio. My name is BJ Button, and as Dr. Marshall mentioned, I am the Executive Administrator for Diversity, Equity, and Poverty. Thank you for allowing me a few minutes just to talk about my role and my responsibility, as well as that of the Equity Resource Manager that is also a new position within DEP. So my primary role is to support racial equity via systemic change, leadership, advocacy, and training, as well as to support Dr. Marshall by serving as a thought partner and also evaluate our programming and initiatives within our department, Diversity, Equity, and Poverty, but also help facilitate interdepartmental collaboration and communication. In addition to that, my primary functions will be monitor the racial equity work within central office and also within our schools, and to also support the analysis of our schools' racial equity plans, provide feedback to our schools for those plans. In addition to developing and deploying professional learning and support to our schools, but also our central office departments as well. In addition to progress monitor and also provide continuous support to our central office personnel and also our schools. So Mr. Moore mentioned a progress monitoring spreadsheet that has been developed and that we're working through currently. I was a part of developing that progress monitoring tool, and that will be in place to help monitor the progress for our reopening plan, our equity reopening plan, but also progress monitor the racial equity plans of our central office departments as well. You can move to the next slide. Our equity resource manager position is designed in part to awareness, the need for culture and climate changes within our district, but also bring awareness to the district about diversity and inclusion. A part of what Jasmine Drinker would do, who is our equity resource manager, will be to celebrate, advocate, and activate role groups, as well as student groups, and being part of our JCPS collective and our JCPS family. So Jasmine has been charged with 15 directives, and expectations that are centered on this particular work. And one of the main directives that she has is to create employee resource groups, which she is currently working on at this time. And in addition to that, developing some anchor documents similar to the EMPT, which we've discussed earlier, and also the R tool, which are two staples for diversity, equity, and poverty, and that are currently in schools and that we're using as a part of our racial equity work. She will also be creating some anchor documents that apply to her role as well. She also will be working with our retired Black administrators and basically heading up that group and helping to get out the support that we need to our up and coming principals, as Mr. Moore mentioned. So again, thank you for the opportunity just to be able to share out my role, my responsibility, as well as that of our equity resource managers. So at this time, I'll turn it over to Principal Stroud and Fulk.
Thank you, Mr. Bunn. I appreciate it. Chair Porter and board members, thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening. During the summer, Dr. Meyer, our assistant superintendent, established 3 racial equity committees specifically for the AIS schools. I'm the chair of the principal's policy, racial equity policy committee, and I want to highlight our members, Ms. Carmichael Murphy, Ms. Carmichael Miller, Dr. Carmichael Murphy, Mr. Fear, Dr. Hogue, Dr. Kiggins, Dr. Colodi, Dr. Majors, Ms. Marshall, Dr. Tall, and with me tonight, Ms. Stroud. Our role is to propose policy considerations. So we have spent the last several months working together to come up with some considerations from our seat as principals. I want to thank Dr. Polio and Dr. Marshall for the opportunity to spread this work within the district. To date, our team has presented to the cabinet, the assistant superintendents, and at multiple levels. Tonight, we have the opportunity to bring these recommendations to the board. This is clear evidence of the progressive nature of our district, and I'm proud to work in that. As principals of the Accelerated Improvement Schools in JCPS, we are honored to lead the charge of educating diverse groups of scholars in our elementary, middle, and high schools. We pride ourselves in serving our students, families, and staff, and the community as we are entrusted with preparing our students for their most promising future. We're proud of the work our district has done to improve racial equity across all schools as outlined in the racial equity policy. This work is fundamentally important to our success as a district and for ensuring that all students and staff reach their full potential. We believe that as AIS principals, we have a unique perspective on how the policies of the district regarding racial equity directly impact our students. Therefore, in accordance with the JCPS racial equity policy, we have the following policy recommendations for consideration.
All right, and I'm Faith Stroud, Executive Principal of Robert Frost 6th Grade Academy and Stewart Academy, and our recommendations are such. We ask that the district regularly publicize their racial equity goal and ensure regular follow-up with schools and departments around that goal. Specifically, we ask that all certificated employees are required to have a racial equity goal as part of their growth plan. We ask that all collective bargaining contracts moving forward go through the REAP process before being adopted as policy. We ask that there is a mechanism for anonymously documenting racial occurrences within the district for all stakeholder groups, and that data be used to drive our improvement efforts within the racial equity pillar. We ask that all district committees have a common dashboard where employees and the public can see what is discussed, decisions made, and that all committees that involve students have AIS and people of color representation. We ask that there is a process developed to support JCPS employees of color to get praxis, tuition, and transcript support and to aid them in becoming certified teachers to help with our teacher shortage. We ask that there be an intentional development of and hiring of people of color within school-based and central office leadership positions that mirrors our student population demographic. We ask that AIS schools be prioritized for innovative programs and that we are supported at a higher financial level for innovative programs such as Cambridge International Baccalaureate, Project Lead Away, Montessori, and et cetera, especially knowing that the majority of the AIS schools have high color populations, students of color populations. We ask that whenever principals meet, there should be time set aside for the professional conversation of practices regarding racial equity. These conversations should be centered in the principal experience.
As school leaders, we stand primed to lead and encourage equity for all of our students in every school in JCPS. And we're willing to collaborate with our stakeholders by ensuring we're racial equity focused for all staff. We ensure equitable access to an education experience that works for our students. Guaranteeing equity is indeed essential to our calling as school leaders. We thank you for the opportunity and welcome any questions at the conclusion of the presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you all leaders. I will hand this over to Chief Adams, I believe.
Thank you, Dr. Marshall. Just going to give you all some information about where we stand on the hiring and some of the different things that have taken place this year. We currently have 1,122 teachers of color working for the district. That's a 16.1%, and while the percentage has not grown that much, we have increased the number of teaching positions as well, so we're seeing our numbers go up in the teachers of color related to that. We reached an all-time high this year of our black male teachers. We had 218 as of January. Unfortunately, we have 2 that have stepped down from their position, so we're at 216 right now, but that is an all-time high for the district based on the information that we have. We've also, since 2018, increased the percentage of those people of color in the chief's positions from 18% to 25%, assistant superintendents from 22% to 37.5%, our executive administrators from 25% to 50% now people of color. And then something also that I'm very proud of the work that the schools have done, and also the HR office and Dr. Marco Munoz as well, some of the individual work he's done there, but for a 50% reduction in our attrition rate of our black teachers. So we want to continue to see that attrition rate go down, and he's doing tremendous work with that, working with our principals on that as well. I'll hand it back to you, Dr. Marshall.
Okay, so we have talked about our general counsel being a superhero, our general counsel, and in this district, even our general counsel is involved in racial equity. He was an integral part in us trying to get some legislation passed for superintendents to have a more recognizable presence for aspiring superintendents of color and to sit on committees. So the reason we're sharing this, as we talk about racial equity, it is not just housed in diversity, equity, and poverty. Our general counsel is addressing racial equity, and we all know most general counsels would shy away from something like this as to protect us, but our general counsel looks like it's looking at this as something to protect children and move the work forward. Another thing, Racial Equity Summit for Superintendents. The Chief Equity Officer for the state of Kentucky, KDE, Tucker Woods, wants JCPS, my division, to actually do a summit on our work with superintendents. The caveat was they wanted the funds, Dr. Polio to be the keynote, to speak about what it's like to lead racial equity, particularly as a white person in a district that is predominantly of color, and he agreed. But this actually speaks to the work and the recognition that's even coming from KDE around the work that we are doing, and that is to happen, I believe, this summer. And one of the things, board, now that you know, you all will know, they actually want to hear from you all as panels what it's like to govern racial equity and how bad does it hurt when you do this work. The utilization of the REAP, we kind of already talked about that. And then another thing, Eastern Kentucky, Western's better, but Eastern Kentucky University is helping us build out our equity screener, and is putting DeJuan Williams, a specialist in my department, in front of the deans of a lot of our colleges of education to help build that out, along with Kirk Lattimore and Glenn Beatty to help build that out as a teacher prep program in the screener. So when they come in front of Amy Green and they come in front of Jimmy Adams and say, I want to teach, they will have a cachet of work from what they've done as pre-teachers, pre-educators to show that they are doing this. This is the kind of impact that we are trying to have as we move the work forward. All right, and to be clear, at best we get 2 claps, not a standing ovation, not a bunch of cheers, because there's a lot of work that still must be done. We understand that the gap is widened, and we understand that we must be tenacious and unapologetic about that work. Because of COVID and just because of the way the American system is set up with racism, the wealth gap has widened. And the sense of belonging is still the lowest in Black girls. You've heard Chief Chevalier talk about it. Dr. Dawson can talk about it. Disproportionality is actually a thing, and it still does exist, and we must address that. And we are addressing the curriculum inadequacies and the curriculum violence that is happening. However, all of that must be accelerated. And again, to go back to the first slide, we must double down. We need to get past diversifying schools and integrated schools. Coming from 36, where I've come from, if I rode the same bus with my homeboys, got late lunch with them, sat in the same classes with them, I was in a diversified school, but not an integrated school. So we need to talk about what it's like to be in integrated schools where everyone's learning, where everyone has access to gifted and talented, and move that work forward. So we need to actually keep diversity, but get into integration as well. And 0 to little people of color in some of our school staffs and divisions. We have had great success, as Chief Adam has said, but there are some schools that have limited or no people of color in leadership or teaching our students. So these are the things that we are still saying sit in our wheelhouse and our responsibility, board included, to address. The first one being the main one, but these are the things that we also say, if you look at back over the presentation, we are definitely headed in the right direction. We are leading the nation in this work, and we are not shying away from the things that are still abhorrent and need to be addressed. So you can plan a pretty picnic, but you can't predict the weather. And that's where we are. We are open for, no, I'm sorry, Dr. Polio, is there anything I missed or you wish to add, or are we opening for questions? Forgive me.
No, I want to thank you for the great presentation and all of the people that you brought, especially principals and community member, Ben Johnson. So thank you very much for taking your time to be with us today to talk about your hard work. So at this point, Chair Porter will take any questions or feedback that you have.
Thank you, Dr. Marshall and your team, and Dr. Polio. The information is much needed in order for us to grow as a district, so thank you for your presentation. I'll start for questions or comments with Dr. Schul, please.
Thank you, Chair Porter, and thank you, Dr. Marshall and your team for such an energizing presentation. I have several questions. First, this is a little bit off the path, but it crossed my mind, so I want to ask it. Have we secured enough MWVOB contracts to meet the quota that we were trying to achieve for the new buildings?
The goal was 15%, Dr. Scholl. We are at 14.17.
Okay.
We are almost there. We have some bids coming up, and I know Chief Harden and Chief Perkins and I are actually going to meet soon. We have almost made our MWBE goal, which we have not done in decades. We're not there. Shawnee was a big help and support from the superintendent and you all to get us to that percent, but no, we have not made 15%. We're like at 14 point something or another, almost there.
Thank you. How are we embedding anti-racism and critical race theory into curriculum?
Carmen, I will start, and then if you wish to jump in. So we have anti-racist specialists now that are building on top of the culturally responsive teaching, and they're working with schools as specialists to make sure that their curriculum affirms racial equity. But we're also, again, disrupting curriculum to make sure that as we are teaching, it is not this feel-good, everybody's great, it wasn't that bad to colonize America type teaching, to really get into the problematic issues that have not been taught in our schoolhouse, to do that. And then when we start talking about that, we decenter, generally we decenter what we normally are talking about and center our marginalized students and talk about the contributions of them and their culture and how they fit in and what they have given. And that's it. In a nutshell, I'll be quiet after this. Anti-racism actually interrogates not how bad slaves were treating, but who inherently was doing this mistreatment, who inherently is doing all of these bad things, and starts challenging the oppressor as opposed to the oppressed. That's what anti-racist curriculum is doing, and that's what I think JCPS is doing better than anyone else, with a lot more to go. Dr. Coleman.
Yeah, you know, our focus continues to be to make the curriculum whole. Dr. Marshall has said that since my first day here, and that has been that's our driving task. And so I'll just echo the things that he said, and also, you know, the cross training that we're doing with our support people for our schools. Is really a game changer. One of the things he and I both say is nobody in the schools cares who you work for, what department you're in, they need help. And we all have to be able to support them. And, you know, things like the R tool, again, that has become just part of the fabric of our work. We've also gone through every text attached to our curriculum framework, and that's ongoing, but we have done an initial review with a tool that actually his team shared with us to use. And I mean, we are working on this from every angle that we can.
Thank you. As we talk about curriculum, in what ways can SBDMs block racial equity work and the inclusion of racial equity nuances to the curriculum in individual schools?
In what ways can they block it?
Yes.
Well, Dr. Marshall, you may want to jump in on this too. I mean, I guess they can block it by the programs that they choose. They do have, you know, control.
Yeah,
over
no, and so
curriculum.
I'm concerned
Yeah.
that SBDMs can be a barrier to the
Yeah.
full implementation of racial equity
They
goals
could.
in
What-
schools.
And I'll say this, I 100% agree with you on that. It has been a frustration of mine in many of our, the programs or things we're focusing on, is whether that's hiring or curriculum are the two areas where I think it impacts it the most, the hiring and the curriculum. However, I think our schools are working extremely hard to bring their SBDMs along with them, and I think that was the training that we wanted to provide. But there is no doubt the legal authority of SBDM makes the work more challenging. John, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, before he does, I got 4 seconds left, so let me
go
ask
ahead.
one question, and then I'll yield my time. I have a bunch of other questions, and I'll forward them. I had sent an email asking who is accountable for each step in the Equity Action Plan. I received a response from DEP, but I did not receive a detailed response detailing the other chiefs who will be responsible. Could I please be responded to sometime later this week?
Yes, my apologies. I think we have put the actual plan, John, tell me if I'm wrong, Dr. Marshall, a Google sheet that has every step along the way and every chief that is responsible for that or person that is responsible for that, and progress notes. So that's on our Q&A document, but I will send it to make sure you get that.
Thank you.
I apologize. Is that correct, Dr. Marshall?
That is correct. The chiefs have put their name beside the things they are accountable for, and there is a working document that manages or that monitors the progress. And Mr. Bunton is working with teams to make sure we make our goals as promised to community and you all voted on.
Thank you very much. Next, Board Member McIntosh.
Thank you. I don't have too much. I love hearing all the conversation around curriculum, lesson planning, and the delivery of instruction is, I think, you're talking my love language. And so I appreciate all the conversation about that. And it really makes me want to roll up my sleeves and share resources and be part of those conversations because it's exciting and frankly, it's fun and it's engaging, and I think our students are going to benefit from it, and they're going to think so too. I won't make you get up. You can just nod. You mentioned the frameworks, the curriculum frameworks. So are those just being constantly updated and the resources are being added in? They're not housed in a separate place? Is that correct? Correct. Okay. All right. Thanks. Because you touched on that. Going back to the U of L program with the dual credit course, I think that sounds phenomenal, and I'm really excited about that. I just want to make sure when we say it's going to be offered at all of our high schools that includes our special and our alternative schools as well.
Yes, we will be offering it to all of our high school students.
Yes, thank you. I like to advocate for those kiddos. And then finally, I think just the other comment that I have, I've heard a lot of conversation in the community about it, and I think folks that don't work with kids on a regular basis don't understand how important representation is, whether it's for females to see other females in STEAM careers or things that were off limits to females for the last many, many generations. And it's just as important for our students of color to see teachers, administrators, folks working in their school that look like them and have shared experiences. But I think it's equally important for our white students to see people of color in roles of authority and in leadership roles as well, because that is the world that we live in. And I think that that's so, so important for preparing our students for the 20th century. And I say that intentionally because we should have already been there. But I just want to commend the work that's being done, and thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Board Member Marshall.
Thank you, Chair Porter, and thank you to Dr. Marshall, DEP, the rest of our chiefs for this work. I think we all know how important this work truly is to advancing our district forward. Can we talk first a little bit about how our AIS schools are identified?
Sure. You want me to?
Yeah, just to lay it out for those to understand exactly.
Yeah, Dr. Dossett, could you come up and give the specifics on that? And so the positive is, prior to last year's changes, they were coming in and out every year, which gave us no opportunity to truly support schools, to take a subset of schools and give them the support they need. Now we have a group of schools that are with us for 3 consecutive years that we can provide that support to. Could you please give an overview of how they get identified, please?
Sure. So the state accountability system identifies schools as CSI and TSI, comprehensive support and intervention, and targeted support and intervention. The CSI schools are in the bottom 5%. And it's based on our state accountability system that looks at proficiency rates in reading, math, science, social studies, writing. Also looks at growth. It looks at English language proficiency, graduation rate, and transition readiness. So our AIS schools are actually all of our CSI schools, so the bottom 5%, plus additional schools that are tracking towards that we want to support before they get to that level.
Okay, so I'm glad that we talk about state accountability systems being the main drive for identifying our AIS schools, because I believe that, if we ask ourselves if our state is putting in the same amount of racial equity work, then I guess my question is, if we're going to continue to push for more resources to get what we need for our AIS schools, how are we overcoming a state accountability system that within itself is not equitable and really isn't going to speak to the needs of our most vulnerable students? So how do we continue to push racial equity and move curriculum and do the things that are great for our kids if we're still going to allow our state accountability system to identify what our needs really are?
Well, I think that's a great question. I don't know if there's a full answer to that question because much of those decisions are out of our hands and really out of KDE's hands too. The legislature makes and determines the accountability system, and it must fit within the federal guidelines. I'm hoping that our new Secretary of Education and that team will provide more flexibility and accountability and more authenticity and accountability. We're not shying away from accountability at all. I think we have to say we're accountable for student outcomes, but ensuring that it's just not aligned with poverty, which right now, that is what the accountability system measures all too often, is just poverty. You can see all of our AIS schools are the schools that are the highest poverty schools in this district without question. And so our highest achieving schools correlate with the lowest poverty almost across the board. So we have to be honest about that. But as I think our principals might be able to pitch in on this, Rob and Faith, you know, I'm a believer in trust the process of providing great instruction for kids, great programming for kids, doing the things that the AIS principals have asked us, providing the supports that kids need, providing effective instruction in every single classroom, expanding the curriculum, expanding gifted and talented, doing all the things that we need to do, and the results will come, especially if we continue to push for more authentic types of assessments of our kids. So Principal Folk or Stroud, either one of you want to comment on that?
Absolutely, Dr. Polio. I think I will echo 100% what you said. If you look at the state accountability results, it absolutely mirrors the socioeconomic status of our schools, which is unfortunate. But that is the parameter under which we work. However, if we're really talking about how we support the AIS schools, we've done an amazing job over the past couple of years making that a huge focus of the district through Dr. Meyer's work. For the first time in a long time, we have had specific supports that are in place. And I would say as we continue to grow in that and expand in that, that's how we'll see those true results and that true success. But I think it is an important point to make, and I think Principal Stroud would probably echo this, that we didn't start to see some of these results and some of these efforts until the reforms Dr. Polio and Dr. Meyer and the board has made to specifically fund and finance our AIS schools. That there has been the biggest game changer for us, and that work is only still beginning. Principal Stroud, do you have anything to add?
No, I agree with that. But as we move forward, for this work on being AIS has brought out the fact that there's best practices that are emphasized at our schools. But even when you look from an equity perspective, if we're going to become a great district, we have to ensure strong racial equity practices, not just at AIS schools, because there is a high percentage of Black kids and brown kids at those buildings, but it has to be systemic across the whole district. And we need to make sure that as we move our work forward, we're not creating a district of have and have-not schools, and as far as expectations for leadership, expectations for teachers, down to expectations for parents and scholars. And so part of our ask is that as we work to become a great district, that we're really doing the hard work around high yield strategies, around closing the gaps with technology, around creating those opportunity gaps, that it's not just at our schools, but everybody is being held accountable. And that if the racial equity pillar is really about our business, then it's going to be seen at every single school.
And I appreciate our principals for that. I know my time is up. And so I'll just kind of end it with this. You know, I think nobody knows more than our principals, you know, what the students in their buildings need. And a lot of times we allow these accountability systems to drive our work or to label our kids. And I think that, you know, I, for one, as one of these board members, I, for one, am done with looking at the accountability system to tell us if we're doing a good job or not. I think that it's time that we push our legislators, we push KDE, we do everything we can to say something has to change in our accountability system, because I know for a fact that principals and teachers are doing a lot of great work and they're working hard, and to let all that be whittled down to a test at the end of the year or a couple of numbers, I think is a disservice to our kids. So I would really like to see us take a stand on calling for change in our accountability systems and to be able to hold everyone, as Principal Stroud so equitably put it, hold everybody across the board accountable for this work.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. Just one last piece is about the accountability system. Actually, on the agenda tonight, on the consent agenda, is approval to participate in a Laboratories of Learning cohort with the Kentucky Department of Education and the Kentucky Board of Education, who are looking at changing the accountability system to address some of the inequities and make it more authentic. So there is the beginnings of that work.
Thank you very much. Board Member Duncan, Ms. Duncan?
Yes, did I get myself unmuted?
Good.
Yeah, you're fine. We can hear you.
All right.
Thank you.
One of the, something that something that has really been impressive to me. I sat in on a U.S. history class the other day, virtually, and the inclusion of World War II African American Regiment, the formation of that unit, the training of that unit and what they went through, and then the placement of that unit in France to work. And they had prepared the unit to be abused when they went to France. And when they got there, the unit was, they had a jazz band, and they played the French national anthem in jazz style, and of course won the hearts of the French people, and then served honorably on the line there with between Europe, or between France and Germany. And then when they returned, they had been treated as equals while they were there in France, but when they came back, they faced more the way that life was in the United States. And it was such just kind of a whole moving article on this, that showing a perspective that I had not read before. I had not, I understood we had African American soldiers in World War I, but I did not understand the personalization of what they went through. So I'm so tickled that we're bringing these kinds of things into our curriculum for our kids to read, for them to understand, and really can see how things were and then how things may be improving. So I love the addition and the expansion of the curriculum. Just that little taste of it that I got was great. I wanted to ask about what the Department of Equity and Poverty has done to address some of the concerns that our Asian students are thinking about right now. Have we taken any steps to do anything to kind of address concerns that they're showing right now from how they may be feeling they're being treated across not just here, but across the country?
Yes, I'll jump in real quick, and Chief Moore, Chief Coleman, if you want to add. And Dr. Kolb actually sent an email a week or so ago about it. It was a quick response, actually predated the mass shooting that happened. As we saw the rise in Asian hate, we created a curriculum and resources for our teachers, understanding that curriculum is healing, for our teachers to use around the Asian hate and how to respond as relates to disrupting, as relates to demystifying the history and contributions of Asians. And teachers and counselors have used that. Dr. Coleman has put counselors on notice to be ready to discuss that. We're saying in the schoolhouse curriculum is a safe way and necessary way to move that work forward, and that is shared. Also, you were talking about the Harlem Hellfighters. Where that started was in meetings we have with the area superintendents. I shared a video, the area superintendents who are serious about racial equity, share that out with their principals and their teachers, and it got all the way in front of you, Linda Duncan. So there is a lot of buy-in around this work, but that is the importance that we are putting on what we're really about, the ABCs and 1, 2, 3s.
Well, I was just tickled to see it come into my face like that. I thought it was, it really gave life to what you're saying we're working on, and I appreciated that. I want to talk generally just a minute. When we talk about disparities and inequities in our system, are we assuming that all disparities are attributed to inequities? Is that kind of the message that we're trying to, I don't know, express? All disparities are products of inequities. Is that a message that we're trying to get out there?
I'll take a stab at it first, on Dr. Polio, if that's okay with you. I don't know if we're saying all disparities are contributed to inequities. What we're saying with the racial equity policies is racism is a problem in this system and all other systems, and they lead to a litany of inequities. So as we are addressing a system that has been designed to mistreat certain students, we must upend that and make sure that we are challenging the inequities that the system that has been designed to do what it's doing is upended. So we are pulling out the inequities that are driven by plenty of isms. Ours is racism right now, and trying to address them in a systemic way to upend it. Is that a fair assessment, Dr. Polio? I don't know if I understood your question wholly, Ms. Nelson.
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head. Thank you, Dr. Marshall.
That was a good answer. One of the things that I want us to be able to do is determine when we do have, when disparities are products of inequities and when disparities are products of choice. Just like I look at our athletic teams, and we have lots of disparities among who participates in our athletic teams, depending on the sport, depending on, just depending on the sport, really, throughout the system. We have lots of disparities, but are those disparities products of inequitable treatment that we're doing? I mean, you look at who is on some of the teams that we have, and are those inequities? I mean, are they inequities, or are they just disparities because of other things? How would you answer that?
Oh, if that was a question, if we go back to curriculum, seeing is believing. And if you look at a sport that's predominantly white, you'll see curriculum that doesn't really lift up the black sports players that are in there. So one of the things when we say, why is there not a lot of black people playing tennis, might be because they don't know about Arthur Ashe. Or it might be because they haven't really been informed on how Serena Williams and Venus Williams came to be. When you look at these type of sports and you look at access and opportunities, curriculum is what we're about. The curriculum of America has never been to lift up students of color or people of color. So some of this, even though it is a choice not to go try out, so the schoolhouse has failed in telling us that there are people that have contributed to that. If you look at the PowerPoint, you'll see a black biker that was actually more famous than Muhammad Ali with Louisville ties. There's not a lot of black cyclists, but if we actually start teaching on who that man is and the fact that there's ties to Louisville, you will see participation move up. So we are maintaining that curriculum is the demystifier of participation and understanding as to who you can be as a black person, a brown person, an indigenous person.
Okay, thank you. I want to get into one thing, the glaring difficulty that we have with disproportionate suspensions. And it's disproportionate. Our African Americans are disproportionately suspended compared to every other group. It's not, it's just every other group. And don't we have systems in place that look at suspensions and review to make sure that we are not suspending kids randomly? I mean, don't we have systems in place where we review every suspension? Because I'm trying to figure out why this persists if we are reviewing these suspensions this way.
Dr. Coleman, you want to talk about what you and Dr. DeFerrari are working on? The research
I have that, yes. Okay. Yes, we review every suspension, but I think the research is pretty clear on that. Just reviewing the data and the suspension is not going to provide the substantive change in that we need. That's data that's research that we have reviewed recently. But I'll also say this, and I've said it before, yes, it's a racial equity policy issue, but it's also an IDEA issue that if we don't correct, we will be in jeopardy of losing federal dollars. And so this is something that all of our school staff, teachers, parents, everyone's going to have to understand. This goes well beyond just a racial equity policy or plan. This is around federal law that we have to address this.
Already.
Ms. Duncan, I'm gonna
Yes.
have to give the floor to Board Member Craig, and if we need to come back to you, we
Oh.
can do that, but at this time, I need to turn it over to Board Member Craig, please.
That's perfectly fine. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Board Member Craig.
I'll echo the comments of my colleagues in thanking you for the presentation, especially Dr. Marshall. You have a tough job. Thank you for your answers to those questions and the grace and eloquence with which you approach this work that we just saw. Thank you. And Mr. Burton, it's nice to meet you. I look forward to working with you in your new EA role. And I wanted to take a moment to thank Principal Stroud. You were a big advocate for the revenue increase that we did last year. I think this is the first time I've seen you here since that night. And that was an important decision that we made to move forward the equity work that we're doing here. So thank you for your support of that. I know everybody supported it, but I specifically saw and heard from you. I just, a couple of comments. I want to echo some things that my colleagues have already said. Mr. Marshall said with respect to the AIS schools, remind me about the change in the law. Are we at risk of seeing in the future more recommendations from KDE to remove black female principals, essentially, again, from these schools? Is that something that's still ongoing, or have we finally moved past that?
I can't say finally moved past it because that could change with any legislation, but at this time, the legislation has changed. We pushed hard for that.
Right.
And I can say as a former priority school principal at that time who faced an audit, and I know both of our principals on this, it's one of the most challenging things you face is a team coming in for 2 or 3 days and then making a recommendation whether you keep your job or not. So that has been removed as a part of the audit process. It will no longer contain a recommendation on the principal's capacity. It will be about the school, and any feedback that that team needs to give about leadership comes directly to me.
It is a procedure that has disproportionately impacted black female principals in the district, and I'm just cognizant of that, and I want to make sure that we recognize that as we move forward through that evaluative process going forward. We heard some recommendations from Principal Stroud and Fulk regarding AIS schools, specifically the labor contract, I think, was brought up at some point. A question is whether or not those recommendations are being adopted as part of the report, or will we see future requests for board action on those recommendations?
So for instance, when we do the contracts and we negotiate those, we will then include the REAP with that information to you.
Okay.
So that can be included. Now, the challenging part about doing a REAP on something that a contract that could be 120 pages long is whether you do the REAP on the entire document or specific portions of the document, and do multiple ones on each various portion of that contract. So we will provide those with you. We will depend on the team that works on those REAPs, but we will provide that information to you, and obviously we'll ask our principals to weigh in on it as well.
Thank you. The other recommendations, not just with respect to the labor contracts, those are going to come before the board at some point at a future date?
Yes.
Thank you. Following up on Dr. Scholl's comments with respect to the SBDMs, we saw the introduction of a Crown Act in the legislature, not just with respect to public schools, but more generally in employment and in other ways, something that's been passed nationwide. I wonder what the process is for dress code policies, hair policies, and things like that. What is the board's role with respect to those? Is that specifically limited by statute to SBDMs, or are those items where the board could step in?
Counselor?
We have
And I'm
addressed.
sorry I didn't prepare you for this. This is
Right.
a thought that I had during Dr. Scholl's presentation.
Generally, those are policies created by the SBDMs, but there have been occasions where some of those policies have not been appropriate, and we step in at the district level to offer legal guidance and support to make sure that those policies are changed to be appropriate. So we've handled it just on an ad hoc basis.
I wonder if at some point we might receive some type of recommendation in one of these reports or in some other way about whether the board could adopt a blanket policy with respect to hair, dress codes and things of that nature, which might be inequitable from school to school to school. It's something I'd like to have further discussions about with you. It's in some capacity, if you don't mind. Thank you.
Yeah, happy to, and I can say that I've seen many of our schools who have relaxed or eliminated their dress code policies as we've come back to school.
Right.
And the students have seemed to do very well.
Right.
So I think it's something that we can discuss.
Thank you very much. And just a closing comment, we had some tough discussions and debates here at the board level about how to open and points that Dr. Scholl rightly raised and Dr. Kolb rightly raised about the way that we were doing it equitably. And the board received some really nasty, negative, ugly feedback, especially from some new on the scene advocacy groups that are no longer represented here tonight, but were earlier. Those kind of ugly comments that the board is receiving is just further proof that there's still a lot more work to do here, and further proof that everything that this district is doing, that we're funding, that we're working hard on under this policy is necessary and needed, and committed to it one more time again tonight. So thank you very much.
Yes, sir. Thank you. And I've received some of those disturbing emails as well.
It's amazing the folks who are so pro-kid are so anti, well, whatever. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Craig. Dr. Chris, please.
Thank you, Chair Porter, and thank you to everyone. Sorry, must have been a loose cord. Thank you to everyone who's participated in this presentation tonight. I'm very grateful for the comprehensive nature of it, and it makes me feel very confident that all the people that I'm seeing on my screen right now are involved in this, from Dr. Marshall on down to his EA, Mr. Button, and the principals and everybody else. And thank you to ACRE for the work that you're doing. Is very, very important and very appreciated. This is just a comment I just want to lodge, mostly with Dr. Polio, and just, no response is needed. Just, want to ask you to make sure you incorporate this as we go forward, really interested in making sure that what happened with the return to in-person plan and equity doesn't happen in the future, and that those things, equity comes to us as part of the package on big things like that. So thank you for that. The main thing I want to say, I don't need to rehash the questions and comments that my colleagues have already made that I had on my list as well. We just, we're starting to see some, which is great, but, we just need to see results, essentially. The work is great, and the effort that people are putting into things is great. But at the end of the day, I think it's the board's job to evaluate, all of you, this administration, on the results that we're getting. So the more you can bring us, concrete measures of improvements and outcomes for students, the more confident I'm going to be, and the less interested I'm going to be in how you get there, as long as you're getting there. So in that vein, I just wanted to mention on one of those sets of results that everybody knows at this point I'm very interested in seeing is around disproportionality in student discipline. And I think I would just add one thing to Dr. Marshall's very, very good answer, which is that the research tells us that the differences that we are seeing are not due to differences in behavior. The research tells us that, it's due to, the racism that's embedded within the systems in our country and our education system in particular at this point. So whatever it takes, that's going to be a really important point for me in evaluating, are we making progress with equity, increasing learning time for students by making sure that they're not out of school due to suspensions or other things. I'd like to see if we have areas in the district that, where we're not seeing the progress that we need to see, I'm interested in some real public accountability around that, because, that we've been talking about it for a long time, and it's time to really see some results around that. So I'll end there. Thank you, Chair Porter.
Thank you. I have a few comments to make. They may not be questions, but one of the things that was mentioned was the laboratories of learning, and we discussed that, and we were talking about the planning for the meeting. One of the things that I have asked Dr. Polio to do to ensure that as we move forward, that we always have someone from diversity, equity, and poverty on committees. You can understand from this presentation tonight the value of the work and the importance of people being at the table for those meetings. So I think that we have learned when we came with the back to school plan. Thank you, Dr. Marshall, for that. We have learned some more tonight. Thank you, Dr. Marshall, for that. But I think that it is extremely important. So I don't have a lot of questions to ask, but I do want to talk about very briefly. The Coalition of Retired Black Principals came to be because of the negative comments about the principals that were called out. And so it's not just females, it's males also, but the majority have been black females. But it is inappropriate to make negative comments for people that do that work 24/7 without understanding the substance of that. So the principals came together and met with Dr. Polio and others to see what can we do so that that does not happen again. So just a little bit of history about the black principals, retired black principals, and I am blessed to know each and every one of them because I'm old school, been around a long time, so I just wanted to give them a shout out because they're not through. They've got more work to do and they want to be engaged and involved, and that's what we need in our district as we talk about providing mentorship and support for our educators. So I just want to say that quickly. The other thing, as we talk about moving forward into the 2021-22 year, and this is not to be answered tonight, but Dr. Polio, would you provide the board with what the funding looks like for schools in 2020 and what it will look like going forward based on what the formula is, because we usually look at the numbers of students and those kinds of things. And as we talk about the work that needs to be done, is the funding there for the schools? I don't necessarily want an answer tonight, but I think it's important for the board to look at what the funding will look like currently that has been sent to the schools, with the understanding that the money from the federal government will provide additional supports, as Dr. Belcher talked about the devices, so that we will have them at home and at school. But I think it's important right now for the board to see what it looks like. And then as we go forward with it, giving the dollars, I would like to ask for that, please. And I would also like to ask how we will move forward in reaching the students that we have not heard from. That's an equity issue too. It's all kind of issue. So not an answer for tonight, but I think that that's something that we need to look at very, very much, and how important that is as we go forward. I think primarily the conversation about ECE is extremely important also as we move forward. The conversation about the nationalities of the students in this district is extremely important. So as we focus tonight on students and conversations, it's not just about equity, diversity, poverty, and equity. It's about all students and making sure that there is equity for all students. And history has made us put the spotlight on students of color. We didn't take that ourselves. That path was made for us by history. So we are dealing with it very well. And I would like to thank Dr. Marshall and his team, the principals that are on tonight. Thank you very much for the work that you're doing. Thank you to the new EA in Diversity, Equity, and Poverty, Mr. B.J. Bunton, who left Wheatley to go to Diversity, Equity, and Poverty. I have to give you a shout out because you left my district, but not really. Okay, so thank you. But thank you to the team, Dr. Marshall. You've got very energetic and devoted people, but you've also got a very energetic and devoted board. So we're not going away, but thank you for what you've given to us tonight. Finished, and the time sign is up. So my last word is thank you, thank you. Dr. Polio, do you want to wrap this up?
Once again, thank you for this. We were a little longer in bringing you this one because of all the back to school. We were prepared about, I believe, 6 weeks ago, Dr. Marshall was. So we'll probably have another one for you sooner to be the second one of the year as we come back. But thank you so much for this cross-section of folks. Dr. Marshall, your team, principals, and everybody that was involved in this. I think it definitely shows that equity is not just a DEP, that we've got to ingrain it in the fabric of everything we do. So thank you very much to all those who spent the evening with us on racial equity. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Polio. At this time, is there a motion to receive the update on the district's equity policy? Is there a motion, please?
So moved. From Craig?
Board Member Craig, is that correct? Okay, thank you. And the second, please?
McIntosh.
Board Member McIntosh, thank you. I will call for the vote, starting with Board Member McIntosh.
Yes.
Thank you. Dr. Schul?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Ms. Duncan?
Yes.
Thank you. Board Member Marshall?
Yes.
Thank you. Board Member Craig?
Yes.
Thank you. Dr. Chris?
Yes.
Thank you. Diane Porter? Yes. It's unanimous. We have moved forward with that. Thank you again to Dr. Marshall and his team and the principals that were with us this evening also. At this time, I have